ओम नमः श्री यतिराजाय विवेकानंद सूरये सच्चित सुख स्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. So we were discussing the uses of concentration and its uses. That is the chapter. There are 4 chapters in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and were discussing the 39th sutra of the first chapter, which has as its heading concentration and its uses. Concentration is synonymous with yoga. The word yoga, which has been defined in the second sutra as chitta vritti nirodha, the prevention of the waves that are formed in the chitta or the mind stuff. So as I told you, human personality is made up, according to Vedanta and also according to yoga, of 3 broad divisions or 3 broad layers, you can say: the gross layer, the subtle, and the causal layer. And chitta forms the causal layer, from where our samskaras give rise to thoughts, which again fall in the subtle aspect of our personality. When it gets converted into thoughts, the thinking mind and all the other aspects of our personality, which are not gross, they can be considered as our sukshma sharira, that is our subtle body. So for the thoughts to come, it has to have a source somewhere, and that source is known as the causal body or chitta. So chitta vritti, when you say chitta vritti, it means the waves that have their origin in the chitta and become vritti in the subtle body. So our subtle body constitutes of the prana, the mind, the things that we normally don't see, but are influencing our gross existence nevertheless. So the vrittis, though unknown to us, are consciously or unconsciously always influencing the gross body. So the whole intention of Patanjali in his first chapter is to point out the uses of this particular effort of ours to stop the chitta vritti, because he says yoga has chitta vritti nirodha. So what is the purpose of yoga? What is the purpose or what is the use of concentration? Now in the first chapter, it's very logical to first explain to us the aim or goal of yoga, which is chitta vritti nirodha. Nirodha means to stop. So since we cannot stop it, we try to reduce it using different methods. And the 39th sutra says yathabhimata dhyanadva. Abhimata means by fixing the mind on any divine form or symbol that appeals to one as good. So now this good is not implied, though it is implied here, it is not directly mentioned. Abhimata means it can be any symbol or form of our choice. But Patanjali, the commentators of Patanjali say that the choice has to be a good one. You cannot obviously calm down the mind or reduce the vrittis of the mind on meditating on a restless person. Any person or any symbol which makes the mind restless cannot be an object of your meditation. So though it is not clearly mentioned in 39th sutra, Abhimata Dhyanadva. Abhimata means on any divine form or symbol or any form, not divine. But Patanjali assumes that since we are very keen to enhance or to follow the path of yoga, we will definitely choose a divine form or symbol which enables us to calm down our mind. There are certain symbols which can make the mind restless. So meditating on that, it may appeal to us as good due to ignorance, but we cannot possibly meditate on that. But here one should notice the breadth of Patanjali's vision and his universality. There is no attempt, absolutely no attempt to impose any particular cult or any particular dogma. And no matter how insignificant or how trivial that object is, provided it is holy, it will shine through the layers of ignorance which envelop our mind. That is his idea. So when you meditate on any object or divine form or symbol, it has the potentiality, no matter how much ignorance there is in our minds, somehow it will cut its way through, and we can see a glimpse of that light of knowledge through the layers of those ignorance which keep covering our mind. Our mind is full of layers of ignorance because of wrong thinking, because of impulsive thinking, because of reactive thinking. So the manas, or the gross part of our mind, not the buddhi, which is full of light. The buddhi is that part of the mind which is full of wisdom, or which is full of discrimination between the real and the unreal. But unfortunately, buddhi is not so very common. It is very rare to reach to that level. So we use these objects with the hope that the light, the inherent light, which is the characteristic of that divine form or symbol on which we are meditating, even the person on whom we meditate, if he is of a calm mind, if he is of a mind which is absorbed in yoga, like Sri Ramakrishna, Buddha, the moment you see these people, you can realize that their minds, their hearts, their soul was full of concentration, full of meditation. So naturally, when you meditate on that, you inherit a few of their characteristics. The characteristics which help you to penetrate through the layers of ignorance with which your mind has covered reality. So everybody knows that the vrittis that we create, consciously or unconsciously, through our lower mind, the reactive mind, we have a tendency to fashion our own pictures and symbols of goodness and project them upon the outside world. So if a fanatic thinks that this particular symbol, however evil it may be, he wants to portray it, this is the path to goodness, and he meditates upon it. So we fashion our own pictures and symbols of goodness. What we believe as good, we try to impose it upon others. We don't bother what its consequences will be on that person. So every such picture which we think as holy may be good for us, in the sense if it is really holy or associated with somebody who is holy. But at the same time, if it is not conceived, or if it is not meditated upon in all sincerity, considering that symbol to be our Ishta, the dearest and the nearest one, you don't have an evil person or a person who is likely to harm you to be your near and dear one. That is why the concept of Ishta has come. But even though the symbol is crude and childish, your relationship to it, the way you fashion your own pictures and symbols of goodness. For example, the simple Shivalinga, or the stone of Kaaba, or the cross, or any other symbol, or any dove, like the Jews do, all of them have certain symbols, or the symbol of Om, or the cross, or the moon and the star. So there are different symbols in different world religions. And to an atheist, or to a scientist, or to a rational person, perhaps they may appear to be crude and childish. But if his association with that particular symbol, if it is a holy one, if he thinks with all sincerity that that will lead to holiness, not that that will give him some worldly gain or advantage. If that is the attitude, then it is pure fanaticism or bigotry. You find so many bigots are there. So these bigots think that their symbol alone has every right to survive, and they insist upon everybody following that particular symbol or that particular personality. So our attitude should that be of associating that symbol or that person with goodness, but it does not necessarily imply that we have to insist upon others also accepting that personality or that symbol as good. So you have to maintain a kind of ishtanistha or faithfulness towards your own symbol without insisting upon it to be accepted by others as a holy symbol. So that is why Patanjali here mentions in a universal way that whatever appeals to you as holy, you meditate on it with all sincerity. It is more important what our attitude is towards that symbol. If you simply think it is a symbol, a stone, as a person who does not believe in idol worship, if he thinks it's just a stone idol, what will it do to me? Maybe for an atheist or a scientist, that may not be an appropriate symbol. So good luck to him. The person who loves his own symbol or his own ishta or his own personality doesn't enter into a quarrel with others because it is his own prerogative or his private choice. So whatever we truly or and purely worship as a symbol of purity, as a symbol of something which helps us to maintain the idea of yoga or helps us to concentrate the mind with the idea of sacred associated with it, that is good for us. Therefore, in this verse, there are two things which Patanjali is intending to convey. First is that we should have intense faith and have a proper attitude of reverence, of sanctity, purity, etc. with the symbol that we choose. We have the freedom of choice, but that doesn't mean that we should feel that everybody else should have that same symbol. He may have some other symbol of purity or other symbol of idea of sacred, and we should beware of any kind of dogma or bigotry which comes in the way of the universal acceptance of different faiths and different choices. At the same time, if you see, it has been remarked in a previous verse, aphorism 32, that we must limit ourselves to our own ishta, our own one way of seeking, and not just keep on changing the symbols. That will lead you nowhere. To have a liberal attitude, of course, does not imply that one can keep changing symbols. Try out one particular ishta, doesn't succeed, go to somebody else, get another ishta. If we keep on changing our symbols, we will be wasting our energy, as I mentioned last time, in some kind of window shopping. We just see many objects, we go through a busy market, and through the window we see so many objects, but don't end up buying none of them. So if you're not interested in buying, then what's the point in just wasting our energy in some kind of window shopping? In the spiritual life, that is a kind of window shopping, which people who have nothing else to do take up spirituality or religion as a hobby, and they go and just satisfy their curiosity. What does this religion say? What does that religion say? So predominantly intellectual people who tend to believe whatever they read, whatever they understand, whatever they try to understand as the gospel truth. So religion is not just following a dogma or following a particular uh, scripture or even a particular person, but trying to experience at least something of the truth that has been conveyed to us, experiencing it oneself and not indulge in window shopping. So, in a previous words, Patanjali warns us that you have to stick to something. You have a choice in the beginning to choose anything, but once having chosen your Ishta or the symbol which you associate with purity, sanctity, sacredness, or whatever it is, then you have to stick to it because that is the only way to success. That is why if and moreover, one point is very important here, that unless that reality is connected to, it is real to us, it is connected with our hearts. Love thy God, as the Bible famously says. Love thy God with all thy mind, all thy heart, and all thy soul. So it has to be. We have to connect with the symbol of our worship or the ideal of our worship or the person whom we are worshipping, the Ishta, with all our mind, heart, and soul. It will not do to just have an intellectual conception of what this particular religion or this particular upasana, this particular spiritual practice teaches us. Books give a lot of explanations, and people have a tendency to go through all these books and satisfy the intellectual curiosity or do some kind of window shopping without trying to enter deeply into one of them. That is the need. That's why there is a need for some kind of upasana. Upasana means sitting near. Literally, upasana or spiritual initiation, which is known as spiritual initiation in Indian tradition, it really means sitting near. Sitting near means considering something which is close, which intellectually satisfies us as close to our hearts. So, loving any object or any person or any avatara or any symbol with all our heart, using all our energies, with all our mind, all our heart, and with our soul. So, that reality, according to Vedanta, reality is everywhere. You can see him in flowing brooks, in the stones, in the trees, everywhere. But they are specially manifest in certain persons, certain symbols, which have been revered through the ages. It is not that all of a sudden some object has become sacred for some in some tradition. No, it happens over a period of time. The vibrations, the cosmic vibrations associated with the worship of that particular symbol, like Om, like the cross, like certain deities or certain gods, they are part of a tradition, and thousands of people following that tradition have worshipped that particular Ishta or god. So the vibrations associated with them, if you believe in the theory of vibrations existing in the universe, one has to believe because that's a logical scientific conclusion. Just as every gross atom is connected to each other, now science has proved that the energies and the mass of one atom are connected to the energies and the mass of the other atom. You can't live in isolation. You can't isolate any object in this universe. It is somehow connected, either through gravitational force or through magnetic force or through electronic force, electrical force, or any other force. The heat, energy, the different types of energy are somehow flowing from one object to another. Energy is being transferred, mass is being transferred. So there is a kind of connectivity. This is a holistic universe. And in this holistic universe, you cannot isolate any gross object. So also if you have a similar, if you apply this theory of universal oneness in the gross universe as physics has established, then there should be a connectivity between our subtle existences, the mind, which is nothing but subtle matter, according to Vedanta. So our minds are also connected. So you have a situation where you share your worship, your attitude, your meditations with thousands of people who have meditated before. And the stronger those vibrations, if it belongs to a tradition where the person who has begun the tradition or who is part of the tradition has contributed a lot to the cosmic vibrations by his intense focus, intense love. That is why when people follow the uh, the traditions of bhakti, whether it is the Hindu bhakti tradition or the Christian bhakti tradition, the people who follow their masters, they love the ideal as much as their masters with an intensity which equals, if not exceeds, that of the founders of the tradition. And the more you intensify your approach or intensify your efforts to focus on that particular symbol or object, the more benefit you get from the cosmic mind. And that is what is known as universal grace, the grace of the masters. Grace does not come unless you create a vacuum, unless you have a feeling that I need to have that same kind of attachment with the object of my worship as the masters in our tradition, in the tradition that I follow, had. So that is the only purpose of sticking to. It's not a question of forming a cult over certain practices. That doesn't give you, according to Patanjali, a freedom to abuse or criticize others because they have their own traditions and cultures. So you have to select, but before selecting, you have to select a symbol or a person who enables you to calm down the vrittis of your mind. That is the only concern Patanjali has. He says you choose anyone, any symbol, anything, any scenery, anything good that is as first associated with the tradition, that is considered to be pure, sacred, and you should be intensely attached to that and not waste your energy in some kind of window shopping. So, as I mentioned, the famous poet Kabir, he was a little sarcastic when he saw a lot of people go on pilgrimage, places of pilgrimage, spending a lot of money and maybe just going there as a uh, as a tourist. So he says the condition of such people is like the fish. When it is in water, it says it is thirsty. You wander restlessly from forest to forest while the reality is within your own dwelling. So the reality which you are searching is within yourself and you are searching for it outside. The truth is here. Go where you will, to Banaras or to Mathura, until you have found God in your own soul. The whole world will seem meaningless to you. So that is the way a devout person negates the when Shankaracharya said the world is unreal, it doesn't mean that it does not exist. The relative existence is there, but it will seem meaningless to you until you have found that universal consciousness in your own soul. So unless we reduce the chitta vrittis, the mental waves, and focus on something, the reason why we focus on something sacred, connect with it, because if you have one particular thought which overrules all other smaller thoughts, good or bad, then you can hope to find in that calm, waveless ocean you can try to find the bottom of that ocean. So you have to dive deep, as Sri Ramakrishna used to sing that famous song. Dive deep if you want to find the precious gems which lie on the ocean bed. You can't wait for the waves to stop. You have to dive deep, because there the waves will not disturb you, and the waves, the higher the waves or the more restless the waves of the ocean, the less there are chances that you can see something which is at the in the bed of the ocean. The precious gems, he says in that famous song, Doob 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 Roop Shagore Amar Man, he says that unless you go dive deep down into this ocean of Prakriti, Prakriti is throwing up waves, as it were. And the moment you dive deep, when you go to the bottom, then things start becoming clearer and clearer. Your ignorance goes. The thick layer of ignorance, because of the wavy mind, the vrittis of the mind, is calmed down for some time. And when it is totally calm, then you can see the bottom and you can discover these wonderful jewels. That is a popular song. So next week we come to the next verse, which is verse number 40. Paramanu parama mahatvanto asya vashikaraha. So this means the mind of a yogi can concentrate. These are all verses for one who necessarily wants to control his mind. So concentration and its spiritual uses. We have to remember this topic of the first chapter in mind. All these sutras do not again and again tell us about the goal. They assume that we have a good memory, we can remember that the goal of this chapter is concentration and its uses. So the mind of a yogi can concentrate on any object of any size, from the atomic to the infinitely great. So some people, when you talk to them, when you request them, or when you uh, ask them to meditate on certain objects, they would have certain choices. Some people like to meditate on God as infinite great, as Sri Krishna in his Vishwarup Darshana. He saw the glorious form, the huge form of Sri Krishna, gobbling up the universes. So also you can meditate on him as the smallest and the finest of the fine. Anoraniyan Mahato Mahiyan, smaller than the smallest. That is how the Upanishad describes the infinite. Infinite can be expressed as smaller than the smallest. You go on dividing something, and then you go finer and finer, it vanishes into nothingness, into infinity. So also infinitely big, Brihad as it is known. Brihad means big. Brahma also means big, infinitely great. Brahma. So that which is infinite. So infinite doesn't mean vast expanse. It can be smaller than the smallest, from the atomic to the infinitely great. So it doesn't really matter what size or what you meditate upon, as long as you can concentrate on any object of any size, from the smallest. If you are happy with the minute, you want to go deeper and deeper, as some of the scientists do in the physical universe. Some people are very happy to explore the vast spaces, the galaxies. They go out into millions and billions of light years. But there are other people who want to go into the heart of matter. They go into an internal universe, which is equally vast. When you go to microns and when you go to the subatomic level, it opens up the present universe, the present atom and the molecule that you are dealing with appears like a big galaxy, as a big universe by itself. So Each atom is a small universe. So this is the realization which Swami Vivekananda had when he saw this particular verse is points out to that he found the truth of the macrocosm in the microcosm, and they were both built on a same plan. This actually happened on this particular date when at Kakdi Ghat in Almora, maybe it was 10th or 9th September, long ago, even before Swami Vivekananda came to Chicago. It was sometime in 1891 or 90 or 91. So he was sitting under a peepal tree in Kakdi Ghat, that is near Almora. Suddenly he came out of meditation and exclaimed to his Guru Bhai Swami Akhandananda that he had found the secret of the universe. He said, in my vision, I saw. What he saw, we do not know, but he said, I have discovered one great thing. The microcosm, the multiverses, the universes, or the multiverses within an atom, and the multiverses in the galaxy, in the vast space surrounding us, are built upon the same plan. So it is a multiverse. They don't say it is a universe now, because there are so many universes or multiverses. We have our own galaxy. So there are millions and billions and billions of galaxies. So the vastness cannot be imagined. So from the atomic, but even the atomic, it is difficult to imagine. The moment you go deeper and deeper into the microcosm, you find it is never ending. You go to the infinitely small and you go to the infinitely great or infinitely big. The journey is the same, whichever way you go. So a yogi here doesn't mean one who just practices yoga, but one who has achieved the power of undivided, one-pointed concentration. So Vashikara, that means he can concentrate, the power can be achieved through this complete mastery of the senses. So when one concentrates, Vashikara normally means concentration. When you shut down the senses, do not allow them to bubble and create waves in your mind. When there is complete control or suppression or a conscious suppression of the waves of the mind, by not allowing it through pratyahara and dharana, all these techniques, then you go to the state of dhyana. When that concentration is, the spiritual aspirant begins to practice concentration, he comes across, you may say, all sorts of distractions in the process. So it is like you do not know when you start clearing your house or clearing a cupboard and the attic or a cellar, some room which has been locked for a long time. You never bothered because it was not disturbing you. But when you open that attic and cellar or the cellar, you sometimes don't realize how much rubbish we have accumulated there. We take out certain things that leads to something else, something which is spoiled, rotten, for which we have no use at all. But still they have been lying there for ages. And that causes a big problem. That subconscious chitta, the attic of our mind, the subconscious, which is the subconscious or the unconscious region of our mind. When we try to concentrate, it is like focusing a torch, taking a light and trying to clear the rubbish which is there in the cellar or the attic in our house. So till we tried not to do anything with it and just locked the attic door, we were happy. That's why you find people who don't practice yoga, very often they are very calm, in the sense they have not touched their subconscious mind. They have not opened the attic. But a person who really wants to clean his house, he will not be able to sleep peacefully if there is rubbish or a lot of rubbish accumulated in the attic. Only when he clears the attic or the cellar, however dirty it may be, once he clears that, he feels Now we can sleep in peace. Those who are really conscious. But most of the people prefer to just close the door and pretend that there's nothing. But when the things go out of proportion, then it creates problem. So when you try to concentrate, it's like opening the attic of your mind. That is what happens, because when you focus, the subconscious mind or the Karana Sharira, where your chitta is there, that is stimulated. And when it is stimulated, unknown rubbish or unknown things which are lying there for several years, which have coalesced or which have um, been compressed into certain samskaras or tendencies as a result of our wrong or habits over the past several years or maybe several lives. They have coalesced to form certain samskaras which are not apparent until we open the attic. When we open the subconscious mind, when we try to concentrate, these are the first things, the rubbish that comes out. So one need not be perturbed. One has to face these things, remove that rubbish, however dirty that attic may be. If you are sincere in your meditation, if you are sincere in your concentration, if you really are determined to focus on the rubbish in the attic and determined to remove it, then no matter how much rubbish you encounter, you just focus on throwing it out. Slowly but surely you will clear that cellar or the attic. So many beginners become discouraged when they see that our mind was fine before we started meditating seriously. Only when we were told to meditate a little more or seriously, when we were superficially, most of the people don't take their upasana or sadhana very seriously. So they don't encounter these problems and they think they are at peace. Swamiji used to give an example of an ostrich. It's a peculiar bird. This ostrich, in which is found in Australia, when some of the other animals try to chase it, it can run very fast, but when it gets tired, it tries to fool itself and tries to dig a hole in the sand and hide its head inside that, thinking that I can't see the enemy, so I am safe, not knowing that it is his whole body, the body of the ostrich is exposed. Maybe it cannot see because it has hid his head and eyes and everything inside the sand and buried it inside. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So we may pretend that our attic or cellar is clean and just put a cover, just close it. But sooner or later, if we want the house to be clean, make the chitta vrittis, if we want to subdue the chitta vrittis, we have to slowly open it. May not be, we cannot do it in a hurry and finish it all at once. It may take a lot of time, and slowly we can remove all the rubbish. So people are discouraged, and they said, before I started to practice concentration, that is the common complaint they make. My mind seemed to be fairly clean and calm. I had no problem with my mind. I don't know where these disturbing and depressive and dirty thoughts are coming now. It disgusts me. Am I capable of doing that? All of a sudden, they are encountering their unconscious self, which was covered with the door to which was closed. The door leading to that attic or to that particular cellar was closed, so you could not see the dirt that was lying there. So instead of getting disgusted and saying that, oh, I didn't know it was so bad, I'm surely this meditation is making me worse, I'm not getting better, but I'm feeling worse. Of course they are wrong, because what they have done, what such people are actually doing is doing some kind of clearing of the attic. There's nothing wrong. Everybody clears the cellar, room and attic. And when they do it, it will definitely make a mess. You can't clear it all of a sudden in at one go. You have to take certain things, throw it, dispose it, and clean it slowly. And if they see a mess inside, that doesn't mean that they can't clean it. Sooner or later, the attic is going to be clear. The mess has to be cleared, but one cannot avoid it. They have taken a step in the right direction. So normally when we take to spiritual life, when we start practicing japa, these dangers are there. That is why some kind of guidance is necessary. That people should not panic, and the calmness that they were imagining before they started taking their spiritual life seriously, before even they started upasana, meditation, it was not calmness, it was the calmness, it was like a lull before the storm. Just before the storm, everything is calm normally. Then the storm comes, and people get a false sense of security when they say, oh, everything is calm and quiet. But they do not know that there is a storm waiting for them. So it is a kind of apathy. And people normally think a calm mind, oh, he is always calm. He's calm because he has never tried to clear his attic or the cellar. He appears to be without depression because he doesn't practice spirituality. He's a happy-go-lucky person who has never tried to fight with his own mind, especially the subconscious mind. But it appears to be very calm. But the moment he tries to do something serious and clear the rubbish in the attic, then the reaction comes. And then he's discouraged, he or she is discouraged, and then they give up spiritual practices, thinking that I was better off in my previous state of mind. Why do I have to do all these things? These are causing some kind of turbulence. They do not know that unless we clear that attic or the cellar, the subconscious mind, and get it and rid it of all the disturbing elements, the tamas will appear and sattva, they appear as the same. Sattva is when you clear the cellar or the attic and everything, and then you close the door. And tamas is you close the door when you know that there is a lot of rubbish inside. So you cannot possibly live with that rubbish. So that is the difference. Tamas and sattva. Rajas is the intermediate state where this restlessness is manifest. So even if it means a lot of trouble, you have to open the attic, use your rajas to remove the tamas, remove all the dirt that has accumulated. And once it is gone, when you close it, then you reach the state of sattva. They look alike. The calmness will come, but it will come as a result of this cleaning process, which is a kind of rajas where you make efforts and do japa. So to pass from this tamas, this lower state where you have pretended that there's no disturbance, there are no samskaras which are there in the attic or the cellar, when there is full of rubbish there. And to pass from tamas to sattva, the pure and the calm sattvic state, the calm tamasic state which is due to ignorance, and the calm sattvic state which is due to knowledge, there is a gap between the two, and in the process there is a violent disturbance of active effort of rajas. That is the phase of rajas which we have to pass through. So that active effort on our part is known as meditation. Patanjali says you use these different objects. There are different methods of cleaning the subconscious mind. This is one of the methods where you take up any object. It may be a small, if you use a small object or a big object, it doesn't really matter as long as you clean the attic. The observer who doesn't know that we are undergoing this struggle may think this person was easier to get along with. We were finding it, he was such a nice person. Now he has taken to spirituality. These are some of the things which we normally observe. That you feel suddenly, all of a sudden, that people might criticize that he is not the person he was originally. He was such a likable person. I liked him the better the way he was or she was. But after taking to spirituality, we are noticing a change in this person. So they think spirituality is something which has spoiled him. They still want that old tamasic person who was apathetic to, he had then apathy to clean. He just showed that portion of his house which was clean and had locked all the rubbish which was there. So people thought externally and mistook that tamas for calmness. But the moment he opened his door, they found that all this rubbish is there. So they think, oh no, he was much better. He was not better. The rubbish was still there. But after cleaning it, then again you come to a stage when you become sattvic, that people understand the transformation that has taken place. But that period of struggle, watching our period of struggle and distress, sometimes people might mistake us. That is what happens normally when we start spiritual practices. So we should not mind that. So Patanjali is giving us a warning. We must continue our struggle with all the temporary setbacks, the difficulties that we encounter when we are cleaning the cellar, till we reach self-mastery, till we reach the goal of one-pointedness of concentration, which Patanjali speaks of. So that is the ultimate goal. So you take anything, and then in the next verse he will show whatever object you choose, the mind or the thought waves achieve sameness or identity with the object of concentration. So you have to choose carefully. Just as a pure crystal takes a color from the object which is nearest to it. Crystal is white, but when it is cleared of thought waves, the same identity with the object of concentration. So this may either be a gross object or the object of perception or the sense of ego. Now, whichever object we identify with, we assume that shape. This achievement of sameness or identity with the object of concentration is known as samadhi. So it really doesn't matter which object we choose, provided it reduces the waves of the mind, the vrittis of the mind. So when you achieve that, it may be a gross object, it may be a small object, it may be a huge object. So that is what this Sutra number 41 says. We will discuss about it in the next class. So if there are some questions, yeah. So there is a question which is more of Vedanta than that of yoga, because this was not the subject of discussion today. But anyway, since nobody else has asked any question, I would rather answer this, but I don't know how it is connected with today's class. Anyway, the question is, Thakur says, Brahman weeps entangled in the snare of the 5 elements. Could you please explain the statement? Is it something similar to Avachhed of Vedanta? Now, you see, the thing is, Sri Ramakrishna tried to make religion, as I have mentioned many times, Avachedavada and the other aspects of Vedanta which try to explain the inexplicable Maya. Now, the problem with the Advaitins, the Vedantins or the pure Advaita Vedantins, how to explain the discrepancies they see in the world within the realm of Maya. You know, there are so many ways to explain why the immutable Brahman, the Brahman who is not subject to any conditions, to any limitations, who is pure. That is how we describe Brahman in the Vedanta. So how can he possibly weep when he is entangled in the snare of the 5 elements? So you have to look at it in a very figurative way. Sri Ramakrishna very clearly says that Brahman weeps entangled in the snare of the 5 elements. Yesterday, if you, in the previous gospel class or in the Monday gospel class also, we discussed this, that the soul, the individual soul, when it is covered by a layer of Maya, which is nothing but the three gross, subtle, and the causal layers, the light of Brahman doesn't shine through. So when here Sri Ramakrishna says he weeps, that means when he assumes a human form, no matter how big that how big or great that form is, we weep out of ignorance. They will weep because they have willingly allowed themselves, the avatars, I mean, they have willingly allowed themselves to be caught in the snare of Maya. Maya, in the sense, they have willingly assumed, though they have nothing to do with the gross existence or the gross universe, but for the sake of helping Jiva on his onward journey to realize his own self, Brahman or Satchidananda himself appears to humanity as an avatara. So here Sri Ramakrishna, it has nothing to not connected to the avacheda of Vedanta. Because here Brahman, when he says weeps, who weeps? It's a human being who weeps. So Sri Ramakrishna once said, Rama wept when Sita was taken away by Ravana. So he wept like an ordinary human being and an ordinary husband who would weep if the wife or somebody, if he lost somebody. So people, how could you explain that if he is Brahman himself? But because he had to assume a human body, he had to assume human emotions, he had to assume everything human. Though they are object lessons of how to transcend this humanity and become divine. But here it is said in that context. So Brahman weeps entangled in the snare of the five elements means the gross, subtle. The elements need not be only gross, they can be subtle elements, the mind and the causal body. So they assume for the sake of humanity to show the way out of Maya, they assume a human body, and when they do that, the weeping and all the difficulties. So that's why Sri Krishna says, Anityam Asukham Lokam Imam Prapya Bhajasvamam. Having attained this Loka, Loka itself means the five elements. Without these five elements, gross or subtle, the Pancha Mahabhuta, the universe does not exist. They are the very cause why a Shiva becomes a Jiva and appears that Jivahood is a result of this covering. So, as a result of that, he has to, though he may not be attached, but he still has to exhibit the characteristics of the five elements. The five elements meaning the five senses, which includes the eyes, the ears, the heart, and all the different gross things which make a human being weep. So when a human being weeps, in spite of knowing or having his identity with Satchidananda, but the properties or the characteristics of the gross will be seen or will be exhibited even in such a condition. So that is what Thakur means. That is the meaning of this statement. So if there are no questions, I'll take your leave because tomorrow there will be two meetings. I have sent the tentative program on WhatsApp. 8:30 to 10:30 is the webinar on Swami Vivekananda and his contribution to interfaith harmony, interfaith religious harmony and peace. So that is the topic. There are many speakers, including the ambassador to the UNESCO and many other celebrities are there. Our General Secretary Maharaj also is there. He will be inaugurating this webinar, and it will begin at 8:30 and maybe after say 20-25 minutes or maybe after 10 minutes, everybody is supposed to speak. So there are about 10 to 12 speakers. I have sent all the details. So according to that, I had requested, because we have a class at 5:45. So I said I should be free as early as possible. So by maybe if it begins at 3:30, at 4:30 or so, uh, I may be speaking, uh, maybe be asked to speak. And then we will have our regular Bhagavad Gita class, which is conducted by the university at 5:45 p.m. as usual. So hopefully this will conclude before that. But after my speech, I will be free. So try to attend. I'll send the links. They will be, you can attend the webinar on YouTube Live or Facebook Live, but you can't ask questions because that will be held on StreamYard, which uh, which will be accessible only to the speakers and one who conducts the meeting. But all of you can observe, those who want, listen to the speeches and the proceedings, all the different speakers on this momentous 9/11, as the 11th September, which is also known as the Parliament of Religions Day, on which Swami Vivekananda spoke, gave his historic address. So to commemorate that, we have this webinar, and after that we have our usual Bhagavad Gita class at 5:45. So I take your leave. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.